Brilliant. All right. Hi, everyone, and thanks for making the time to sit through the next 45, roughly 50 minutes of me talking. I know a lot of people say I talk too much, but this is one place where I'm sure some people wouldn't mind. All right. So a couple of days ago, I was figuring out how what should be the title of the presentation, right? So we talked about from the brief I got from Rafael. He was like, okay, so we need to help. We're talking about businesses, we're talking about entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, people who are just starting out, and we wanted to help them set their business, create their product. So I figured, okay, how about we call it how to set up a business, create your products, launch them, and market them sustainably and successfully. And then last night I was thinking, man, that's a really long title. And if people are going to fall asleep just reading the title, they're probably going to fall asleep quicker halfway or maybe even before halfway through the presentation. So then I decided to switch it. And right now it is very clean, very simple. It's build, launch, and market products that people love. Very simply. Okay. So now before I go ahead, just wanted to share with you a little bit about me and my a bit of my story. So I've spent the last 20 plus years in the marketing industry. A majority of the time, I think 12 plus years have been in senior marketing roles, from CMO to head of marketing to head of product to head of sales. So got a very different perspective. That said, however, I've also worked in the trenches. My first job was a marketing executive, and even though it was marketing executive, I did everything from hauling boxes to sending faxes to sending to taking down minutes of the meetings to everything in between. Um, I've worked within the technology, logistics, aviation, banking, hospitality, and the startup verticals. I've set up 5 different businesses on my own. Some have failed, some were successful, some have kind of become defunct because they've kind of outlasted or outlived technology, or they've just saturated and over matured. And a lot of my stories and a lot of my learnings have come from those, in addition to all the very many startups that I've helped and my company NexGen Digital continues to help right to this day. And on a personal side, I'm a family man, got a 4-year-old son, and you might hear him in the background when he screams. It's like 4-ish in the evening, so he's still hyper. I'm a big WWE fan. I don't know how many of you guys watch WWE or pro wrestling, but I love WWE. Been watching it since I was 6, 7 years old. And I'm a big watch collector. I love watches, any kind of watches, whether it is a chronograph, a mechanical watch, a vintage timepiece, a quartz. As long as it looks good and as long as it has some kind of story, I love them. All right, so um, I've divided rather this presentation into 2 parts. The first bit is we're going to talk about foundations, right? These are again foundations of everything that I've learned, everything that I've implemented, executed, and succeeded and failed. And these are basically lessons that I've learned and that I'd like to share with your community. And the second part of the presentation is basically some basic motivational tips and advice that you probably would have heard from lots of other people, but I just thought I'd sort of punctuate that a bit more since I have your attention. Right. So the first things first, when people set up a business or when they're thinking of setting up a business, this has been a mistake that I've made. And by the way, you're probably going to hear the word mistake a lot, and it's totally fine. A lot of us have made mistakes. A lot of you guys are going to make mistakes. And that is, in fact, one of the best ways of learning is by making mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I see people continue to make today is they have this idea, right? Or they have this idea for a product or service, and they say, "Well, we want to come up with this. We want to launch this." Um, and the thing is, they'll come up with a marketing plan or a sales plan or a product plan or whatever, but they will not come up with a brand or a value proposition, a customer proposition, or value proposition, or a company proposition, or corporate proposition, whatever it is. You have to have a value proposition. All right, you have to have a global value proposition, and that value proposition serves 3 main stakeholders. One, it serves your customer, your value proposition to customers. How is the customer, i.e., the end user, going to benefit from using the product or service that you're going to launch? Is it going to be a faster time? Is it going to be a longer lasting product? Is it going to be a better quality product? Is it going to be a better service? Whatever it is, you have to figure out what the value proposition is for your end user, your customer, right? Then you have to figure out what the value proposition is for your investors. Now, if you're a solopreneur, obviously, what is the value in it for you, right? You're obviously, it is going to be profit. And we're going to look at that at a later stage towards the end of this presentation. But there's always going to be an aspirational value for investors. Put it this way, a lot of the investors, like for instance, if you're going to pitch a technology product to a venture capitalist firm or whatever, a lot of them are already rich, right? So capital gains are not a big thing for most of them. Some of them, yeah, they're always obsessed with finances and money and stuff. But a lot of them, and I've spoken to quite a few of them, once you've gone past that stage, once you've made your 50 million, your 100 million, then money is not everything. Then it's all about aspiration. Then it's all about feeling that they want to be a part of something that really can change the world, or feeling like they can be a part of a development phase of a product or service that's really going to revolutionize business. You got to give investors that when you're pitching, especially. So your pitch has to get targeted customers and target to investors. What are they going to get apart from the obvious, which is return on investment? What are they going to get? Okay. And then obviously it's the employees. What is the value proposition for your employees? A lot of people think, oh, that's not important in the beginning stages, which is maybe true when you're just the one person running the show. But when you start getting people working for you, right from your first employee to your second employee to your fifth and your 10th and your 15th, you need to have some kind of value proposition for them, right? Chances are, because you're a startup, you're not going to be paying a ton of money, right? But then in exchange for that sacrifice, if I'm going to employ, if I'm going to seek employment in your firm, what are you going to offer me in return? Are you going to offer me training? Are you going to offer me the chance to be a partner in the business? Are you going to offer me a vision or leadership role? You got to figure out what you're going to offer your talent, right? If you don't have a value proposition to all these three stakeholders, then it doesn't matter how successful you are eventually, and the chances are you will be successful, but somewhere down the line, your business is going to be broken because you didn't have a strong uh, value proposition. So very important, keep that in mind. Next, I was going to say you need to have a target market. And yes, obviously, everyone needs to have a target market. In fact, if you don't have a target market, you shouldn't have a product or a service. But I want to take it a step further. Yes, create a target market. All right. You need to figure out, okay, so this is a product we're launching. It is aimed at people, at males between 25 to 35, or females between 35 to 45, whatever. That's your target market. But within your target market, you will also have something we like to call a buyer persona, right? And what is a buyer persona? A buyer persona is a fictitious representation or semi-fictitious representation of your ideal customer, right? So it is based on real facts combined with a little bit of fiction, right? So I've taken the liberty of this is a buyer persona. I use this in a lot of our examples. This slide, in fact, has been taken from our corporate presentation for our growth deck. And I've used the example of Handsome Harry, and you can give them cool names because you want to refer and you want to remember them in case you're having a conversation with your team member. You don't want to say, "Oh, buyer persona A, buyer persona B." It's very easy. It's a lot easier to understand Handsome Harry, or Angry Albert, or whatever you want to call him. So in this example, Handsome Harry, he is 30 years old. But by the way, this is a fake. It's not real. It's a fake persona, right? But it's based on some reality. We're aiming for somebody who is like Handsome Harry, who is roughly 30 years old, who's got a business degree, whose occupation is marketing. He's a marketing manager, and he's a newly promoted marketing manager. And the reason we need to ask all these questions, or to figure out where he stands, in fact, we also need to get his goals. What are his goals? What are his personal goals? What are his business goals? What kind of a personality he has? What are his frustrations, just generally in life and also at work? What are things that make him really frustrated? Give what are some of his personality traits? Is he in this example, he is self-obsessed, but he's also friendly and helpful. He's politically very liberal. Now, the reason we need to figure out all these things is because eventually, when we start creating our sales funnel or marketing funnel, you need to figure out how to attract people like Handsome Harry, right? So for instance, if he is politically liberal, where do 30-year-old politically liberal males hang out? Do they hang out on Facebook, for instance? Do they hang out on Instagram? I'm talking about a digital space. You can take this offline as well. You can take it to, does a 30-plus-year-old liberal hang out at coffee shop A? Does he hang out at a Starbucks? or does he hang out at a Caribou, or does he hang out at a, I don't know, whatever brands apply to here. But the idea I'm trying to get across is their lifestyle and their behavior will dictate how you reach out to them and in what manner you reach out to them, right? Are you, a 30-year-old will probably be more towards Instagram and less towards Facebook, whereas Facebook's demographic has grown a bit older now. So Facebook is looking at 45 plus. uh, Depending on whether, if it's a purely B2B product, let's say if you were selling content marketing services, then I would look at LinkedIn, but then I would create content aimed at a 30-year-old LinkedIn person, not at a 50-year-old LinkedIn person. So maybe a 30-year-old LinkedIn person would prefer watching a 1 minute video as opposed to a 50-year-old person on LinkedIn who's a professional who would prefer maybe reading a blog post. So these are the questions you need to ask when you're building a persona, and building that buyer persona will help you refine your target market. That way, you're not spending money unnecessarily on people that are not within your target market, right? This is one very crucial thing. It saves you a lot of time, it saves you a lot of effort. Most importantly, it saves you a lot of money, because instead of throwing money at anyone and everyone who 90% is not in your target market, especially if you're in a B2B niche, having your buyer persona will help sort of streamline your efforts and focus on that particular niche that you are really attracting or you're trying to attract. So buyer persona done. Then you need to define your unique selling proposition. And that is basically three questions: who, what, and how. Now, who, let me break that down, is who do you help? Which particular niche do you help? And this, by the way, you can also take this and you can convert this into your elevator speech, right? An elevator speech is basically, I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already, but just in case you don't, an elevator speech is something like a brief 20 or 30-second introduction on either yourself or your company that you give to someone else, that should, if you do it right, he or she will be able to understand what you do, like that, right? If you have a good elevator speech. So this can also be spun around to an elevator speech. Now in this instance, who do you help, with what problem do you help them with, and what is a solution to their problem, right? So here's an example. Who do you help? We help startups and SMEs. So clearly, we're kind of refining who we're targeting. So if it's a large company, if your service is aimed at startups and SMEs and entrepreneurs and startup founders, then you don't have to be bothered about reaching out to the GEs and to all the large companies, because they're not your target market. We help SMEs and startups. We don't help the likes of GE. We don't help the likes of Cisco and Sony and Disney and stuff. We help small businesses. All right, that's number one. So you've kind of refined your market. All right. Number two, we help them with what problem? We help them getting more signups. I'll demonstrate this in another example in a bit. And finally, what is the solution? We'll help them with getting signups by optimizing their online sales funnels and landing pages. By the way, this is roughly what we do. And here's another example. This is for a real estate niche. So we help real estate agents get more leads for property viewings. We don't have them sell, by the way. We help them get more leads by getting more bookings online. So this is probably like an agency that helps real estate agents or real estate companies get people to book more viewings, not people to come go and sell the flats or apartments or houses or pieces of land or property, but make more bookings. And what they do it is they either optimize a funnel, or they make a process easier, or they will do an advertising campaign, whatever. That's not specified. You don't need to specify everything in your value proposition statement. You need to just tell them a brief of what you do, right? So this basically helps you filter. It helps you keep the non-targeted people outside, and it helps attract the right kind of people. And by the way, you can use this on your content marketing strategy. You can use this on your paid ads. You can use it pretty much everywhere. It's very versatile, this principle. Then we talk about prototyping. All right. Now, I just looked this up a couple of days ago. Prototyping is an early sample model, a release or product, or product built to test a concept or process. It's a term used in a variety of contexts like semantics, designing, electronic software, etc., etc. And a prototype is generally used to evaluate a new design to enhance precision by system analysts and users. Now, I know, again, very boring definition. Simply put, prototyping is a process of creating a sample product to be tested in a real world environment. So you create a sample to be tested. A prototype is basically a sample. The only difference is a sample is not mass produced. a lot of you might be thinking, oh yeah, I get samples of food and samples of whatever. It's these are not mass produced; they're very limited editions, and they're beta versions of it. All right, and they're meant to get people's opinion, get people's feedback, get people's advice on how the product should improve or the service should improve, so on and so forth. The different kinds of prototyping. So there's sketchboards, there's user flow, there's journey maps. Sketchboards are very popular with architects and designers. Even though a lot of them have modernized and do things over AutoCAD, I know personally a lot of people who still prefer to sketch the initial drawing on a sketch pad and then transform it into an AutoCAD drawing. So this initial sketch will be your prototype. A user flow type prototyping is more for if you're developing an app because you want to get the flow of what happens when somebody signs up, and then what happens when he joins, what happens when he or she downloads an app, what happens when she buys a product, and then what happens when there's a customer service issue. So everything has different user flows, right? Then you have journey maps. Again, very similar to user maps. Somebody just sort of plots a journey either online or offline. This can also be offline. And then you have 3D printers. These are just four, by the way. There's tons of prototyping methods. 3D printers is for actual physical products. So you make the initial product just so that people get the look and feel of how it's going to perform, how it's going to behave, how it's going to act, and then you decide on whether you're going to make the exact same product or whether it needs to be refined a little further. Right now, I want to take prototyping to a little bit further stage. I can't really see any chats or anything right now, but I would have asked you guys if you guys have heard of the concept of MVP, minimum viable product. Not most valuable player in basketball or football, but minimum viable product. A minimum viable product is a product with enough features to attract early adopter customers and validate a product idea, before you actually begin the product development cycle. All right. So what that means is, I'll simplify this again. A simpler definition is, if you were thinking of getting a cake, a wedding cake, all right, it's not your wedding yet. Your wedding's in 6 months' time, let's imagine, and you're looking at different flavors. The bakeries are not going to just bake you a cake. They're not going to bake you a full-on cake that is meant to be served for 500 people or 300 people or whatever. Uh, I'm Indian, so we have thousands of people at our weddings. But yeah, um, they're going to give you a sample, right? Of late, I know a lot of bakeries that give you samples in the form of a cupcake because you can actually customize that cupcake, right? Depending on mainly the bride, sometimes the groom, but mainly the brides, depending on whether they want vanilla or chocolate, what kind of filling they want, and what have you. Now, realistically, it is very difficult to customize an entire wedding cake because, well, it's tough, it's time consuming. Most importantly, it's very expensive, right? So what you do is you customize a miniature version of that wedding cake, aka a cupcake, and that's when so you can have several different kinds of cupcake till you decide what you want, but you're not nearly spending the same amount of money as you would a big wedding cake, right? So it's the same concept. If you have a product or service, there's no need to launch out the actual product or service in its full shape or form. All you need to do is take the vital bits, the vital components that the product or service will or should embody, and then test it out on your market. Now, I'll give you a really cool example, which I absolutely love. Um, I'm sure you might have heard of this company called Intuit. Intuit is basically a financial software company, and they were, I don't remember when, 2012, 2013, 14, roughly, it could be earlier. They were employed by the Indian government uh, to figure out how they could increase the profits for the local farmers. As you know, India is huge on farming, but the problem was a lot of the farmers, because of the territorial issues, moving from one village to another was time consuming. A lot of and a lot of them did not have decent storage facilities. A lot of the produce, especially fruits and vegetables, would go bad the next day. So they were limited to whatever. Excuse me, they were limited to whatever stock they sold on the day, and unfortunately that meant a lot of stock was wasted, a lot of produce was wasted, right? So they invited into it, and they said, listen guys, help us figure out how we can use technology, some kind of technology, to sort of modernize the operation so that we can help these farmers save some money. So Intuit, their development team thought long and hard, and then they didn't go on with a full-on product, right? They didn't develop this product, or whether it was an app, web application, or app, or whatever. They didn't say, "Oh, we're going to build this app, and it's going to cost $1 million, and it's going to have all these really crazy features." No, no, no. They didn't do that. they decided to test out different theories. So the first theory was, they said, let's create a buyer and a seller marketplace, like an eBay, right? Like an eBay was just bring buyers and sellers together online, and they would be, buyers would just take a look at the product and buy it. Unfortunately, after a little bit of testing, they realized that because of the culture and the way people are, people, buyers especially, wanted to see the product. They were not just, they wanted to actually see the product. They were not just going to look at pictures online and say, okay, we're going to bid on that one. And they also had some problems with the bidding process. They weren't really they weren't really trusting of a machine, of an online process, because again, you got to remember, these are not very educated. Most of them were illiterate farmers. Then they rolled out another option, which is a supply side crop information sort of a system, where somebody would send out on a mobile phone, would send out messages saying, okay, so these guys have, today we have, this farmer X has 300 kgs of potatoes and they are very good, and 600, they had a rating system, and then he has 50 kgs of tomatoes and they're average, and they have 25 kgs of bananas and they're poor. I don't know, they decided a system, and that didn't work because, again, the idea was not clear, and they had a lot of synchronization issues, because again, it was all a matter of how soon you could get all that information back and forth. So this was a problem again, so that didn't work. Finally, they tested out this idea, which was a text message matching system, right? And this message matching system depended on an algorithm. So what a buyer did was, sorry, what a seller did was, a seller, there was a central number, like an online, like a virtual 1-800 number. I don't know what you call them in every part of the world, but it's like with the 1-800 numbers, a global hunting line, or whatever you want to call them. There was a number that you could text. So all these suppliers would send a text saying, oh, we have so and so and so and so products, whatever. And then on the other end, sellers would get information, like, okay, so there's interest in this product, there's interest in this product, there's interest in this product, quote a price. Now the beauty of this was, this was tested on a very small scale and it worked. So then, because it worked, they actually went ahead and built a full app. All right. Note, they did not build an app in the beginning. They did not build an app. They did not build a website. They did not build anything. This is the best part. You guys are probably going to laugh. You know what they actually did? They actually had, I think, 3 or 4 guys sitting in a room with a bunch of cell phones. And on one side, they had suppliers, and the other side, they had sellers. Okay, sorry, buyers. And all they did was, because those guys had created their own mental algorithm of sorts, and they knew, okay, so they had this guy who had potatoes. Oh, I know this guy who needs potatoes. Let me match them together. So it was literally a manual human algorithm sort of thing, but it worked. And because it worked, they ended up building that app. Now imagine if they had spent, tons of time and money building the first 2 applications. That would have been a colossal waste of time. And this is where an MVP comes. This is basically a minimum viable product. Your end users, your customers don't really need to know the back end. They just need to know how they, but that their services are being executed, or the products that they're buying are going to get there, whatever. They don't need to know the back end. They don't need to know how you're managing the service. As long as you can get those test subjects out there and prove the validity of your statement, of the validity of your business process, you're good to go. The key learning here is, don't spend tons of time and effort and money on building this all-encompassing product or service that is perfect. Go with what you have, as long as it serves the purpose for that customer or that end user, and then see what happens with that. Right. Then we look at the launch. Excuse me, I'm just gonna grab some water here. So then we're talking about launch, right? So you've got your brand, you've got your value proposition, you've got your minimum viable product. Now you're going to launch it. How are you going to launch it? You got to launch with a clear set of purpose, a clear set of a clear purpose. Right. I've mentioned teams here, but clearly, if you don't have a team, can be a team of one. It doesn't have to be a team of 50, 20, 100 people. You can have a team of one, as long as he or she, however big or small your team is, as long as that team is specialized and knows what their priority is, especially in that early stage. Later on, once you're successful, you can mix and match teams and you can merge teams and what have you. But in the beginning, it is extremely important that you have teams. And again, I don't want to confuse you guys. I know a lot of you guys are going to be saying, well, early on a lot of people bootstrap and they exchange and they do everything. Yeah, it's fine, you can do everything, but when you have a team, one person can be a part of many teams. I, as Barry Rodriguez, I can be a part of the customer experience team, I can be part of a business process team, and I can be a part of the technology system team. But when I am within the customer experience team, my entire focus is on customer experience. I cannot be thinking about technology system. That's what I mean, right? I know a lot of you might be saying, well, I know, when you're an entrepreneur in the early stages, you have to do as many things. You have to wear many hats, which is fine. You can still wear many hats, but you're not wearing many hats at the same time. You're wearing many hats dependent on, you're wearing a specific hat depending on what your role is at the time, right? So you have a customer experience team, you have a business process team, and again, if it's a technology driven or technology focused product, you have to have a technology systems team. So each team knows a little bit about what each other is doing, but their primary focus is based or is purely focused on what their primary efforts, excuse me, are focused on what their team's goal is. Right? Very, very crucial. Then when you're planning a product launch, again, a lot of mistakes people made, a lot of mistakes I myself have made, and I've not just made them once, I've made them multiple times. So, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, because well, that's why we're here to learn from each other's experience. So the first things first, always have a specific goal in mind when you have a launch plan, right? I know a lot of you will say, well, it's a product launch. I'm launching my product. That's the idea. Yeah, it's true. But then you need to figure out, what do you want people to do with your product, right? Do you want them to remember your product? Do you want them to buy your product? Do you want them to sign up to a trial, sign up to a demo? Very, very fine details you need to figure out, because at the end of the day, you have to have a call to action. Whether you're doing a massive spend, an expensive launch in front of thousands of people, inviting media, or whether it is a low key affair online, or whether it is just 20 people in a hotel room, irrespective, you have to have an end goal. What do you would, I mean, because you're not going to believe this. A lot of people think it's just a formality to have a launch. Hey, I should have a launch because it's a new product. You don't really have to have an official launch if you don't want to. Now, if there's a reason you're having a launch, like for the reason that I've said earlier, like you want to get people to sign up, you want press, you want a lot of press coverage, whatever, then you should clearly define what the goal is in your launch. Then you have to have a realistic time frame for the expectations based on data, right? Data is everything. Data, intelligent forecast, whatever. Don't just assume that your competition did it in 3 months, that you could do it in 3 months. It could have been a different time. It could be 5 years ago. It could be a different time of the year. It could be an entirely different product. It could be an entirely different team. There's so many factors. You have to base your time. You have to sort of allocate your time based on data and analytics, right? Next, sales enablement should be based on product benefits and not features. Classic mistake that people always seem to be making. Whenever you're selling your product or your service, the way you sell is by painting the story of how it's going to benefit them, how people are going to benefit from using the product. A story, not really showcasing the actual features of the product. Because trust me, people, unless it's a super technical product, 90% of the time people don't care about the features. Well, they do and they don't. Let me explain.